degradation. I think it's part of our not taking care of ourselves, and I think it's part of sin, quite frankly. Back to my slide. We're dealing with an issue here that sleep deprivation is played down. I wish for just 1 month that there'd be no caffeine in the world. If that happened, guess what would happen to people? They eat more sugar. They would do something different. You're probably right. Maybe they even go away to amphetamines. But the point I'm trying to make is if we would get caffeine out of the system, the first week they would have a headache. The second week they'd probably start sleeping better. By the end of the month, they may not even consider going back except for the flavor and the smell and the whole ritual of getting up in the morning and having a cup in your hand and walking around the house, okay? But what would happen to our population was they would actually start sleeping better in the long run, and they would sleep longer, and they'd have less problem with what I'm reading about here. Sleep-deprived people, 4.5 hours a night, have 3 times the amount of insulin floating around their bloodstream. This stuff is caustic, folks. It's absolutely necessary, but it's one of your major vessel irritants. When the insulin level is up, you don't get that cell breakdown, that autophagy I'm talking about. You don't get cells to be broken down, to be cleansed, to be rebuilt, and then you get new tissue. You lose out the recycling process of rebuilding your body. And guess what? If you hang out with everybody your age and everybody talks about their problems and you all feel just as bad, then what are you good? You got good company, right? You folks need to start hanging out with young people. Okay, they keep you young. They have more energy than you, and you go, well, that's what I used to have. Well, don't settle for second or third place. Dr. Jordan from State College, Pennsylvania, a simple trick, and he was obviously doing with participants on a weight control program, snack less during their evening meal preparation if they had as little as a 10-minute nap before they started making supper. America is sleep deprived. America is losing their mind because they aren't sleeping. And we make all kinds of excuses. And by the way, even if you take Ambien and you get knocked out, you only go into you only go into your second category of sleep, second stage of sleep. You don't get that deep stage 4 REM, you don't get that sleep. And so you wake up what? Forcing yourself with 8 cups of coffee to make it through another day. The dietary trends over the years tell the story. If you show me any population around the world and show me what they've eaten for the last 50 years, I can tell you what their diseases are and give you an estimate of how big their hospitals are. Dr. Dennis Burkitt made a really interesting comment. He said, the size of your hospitals are inversely proportionate to the size of your stool. In plain English, that means, inversely means if one is large, one is small, and vice versa. Well, can I give you a tip about America? We have large hospitals, okay? In 1860, we look at the dietary intake of the major components, protein, fat, and sugar, and starch, and you have a change over the years. So in 1860, the protein intake was about 11%. The fat intake was about 25%. The sugar intake was about 10%. And the carbohydrate, or the starch, was 53%. Why is that significant? Well, back then, if you go back and if you read your red books, we're told we were eating too much sugar. Well, too much sugar was back in the 1860s, and we were eating 10% sugar, and we were still eating too much. Well, look at the trend. Here's what happened. As the starch, the carbohydrates keep coming down, less oatmeal, less whole grains, less rice, less beans. It keeps coming down over the years until now we're at 11% from 53% of our diet. That explains everything right there. Any population that does that can't help but be diabetic. It just is 1 + 1. On the other hand, if you look at your fat, you start here and you work your way up to over 44%. You can say something's going to take its place. So fiber comes down, fat goes up, protein is stable, and sugar goes up. It's a deadly combination. Okay, how fast is what I'm talking about going to work? If this doesn't inspire you, then I'll try another slide, okay? This is so phenomenal, and I see it in the office, and that's why I like working with diabetics. I get such dynamic results in such a short period of time. It's amazing. Look at this slide. Over here, percent change from baseline. Okay, so weight is on this side, and when it has minus numbers, that means we're not looking at a total weight. We're talking about you've lost 1%, 3%, 10%, 11%. On this side of the chart over here, you've got percent change in your glucose. So how fast does your weight come down for how much glucose comes down, your blood sugar level? Look at this. 1 week on the program that I'm talking about, we start here at 0.0. After 1 week, the person's weight has come down, up here, squares is the weight. The weight has come down about 3%. So let's say you weigh 200 pounds. After 1 week, you've come down 3%, so now you weigh 194. You say, not bad for a week. Well, you're absolutely correct. And we see it on a regular basis. Usually don't keep up that pace, but we see it on a regular basis. But what I want you to look at, the glucose are the round circles here. In 1 week time, 1 week, folks, stay with me. 1 week, the blood sugar has come down about 42%. So if your blood sugar was 200, now it's less than 120 in 1 week. Amazing how fast the body can heal. Now let's keep going. Let's look at week 2. Your weight is now, you've lost 5% of your weight, or you've 10 pounds, we're using our 200 example. Blood sugar has now dropped from 200 down to less than 100. You are no longer defined as a diabetic in 2 weeks. You go, whoa, where's that clinic at? It's right in your kitchen. You don't need to spend $10,000 and go to Emory. I was talking about that. You don't need to go to Weimar. Now these places can give you a jump start. But the biggest problem with the jump start is you forgot to bring the chef home with you. You're going to have to make it work out of your own fridge, out of your own cabinets, but this is possible. And I wasn't being facetious last evening when I said, if you will eat nothing but vegetables, you'll even be ahead of this schedule here. I see it over and over. So I look at it this way, okay? I can come back a year from now, and there can be no diabetics in this room. Or I can come back a year from now, and what? You're ready for another good lecture. It's that simple. The reason I'm showing you how fast it happens is because I'm not talking about a 5-year commitment for the 5 years you've messed yourself up with. I'm talking 2 weeks. Let's look at 3 weeks. At the 3rd week point, we've lost about 6%. We lost 6% of our fat, and our blood sugar is still staying down below 50. At the 4th week, it dropped down a little more to about 55%. Then went up and then down, and it will fluctuate down here. There is no drug, there is nothing you can do medically to have this kind of results except what you eat. That simple, or that difficult. Dr. Capps was a very interesting doctor. First, he's got the reputation for practicing in 7 decades, which, that sounds incredible. You know, how old was this guy before he gave up? Well, the point is, when he practiced in 7 decades, he could practice in 7 decades and still only have practice for 61 years. By the way, that's long enough. That would have spanned 7 decades. I didn't ask him how he did this, but I will show you his results. But before I do that, I want to tell you the rules that he followed to get the results I'm going to tell you about. He had 3 basic rules. You have to eat breakfast. You go, well, I can handle that one. The second rule is you can snack if you want to, and I didn't like that rule. And along with the snacking, you can eat whatever you want to. And I didn't like that rule either. But the 3rd rule really got my attention. You can't eat after 1 o'clock. All your eating has to be done by 1 o'clock. I know you're looking at me like I'm another head here. Okay. Hang in there with me. When you see his results, you are going to be totally impressed. even if you think you can't do it. But I'm here to witness for you that I can eat 2 meals a day and still stand before you, and I haven't lost everything, and hopefully I'm keeping a few more marbles. But look at his results. All patients, no exception to his rule, that followed the instructions lost weight. First goal, losing weight, getting more insulin receptive, not insulin resistant. Those who ate only breakfast, wow, they were hardcore. 1 meal a day, that would take some practice. But the ones who chose to eat only breakfast averaged 10 pounds of weight loss a month. Well, I guess so. Those who ate breakfast, lunch, and snacks averaged 5 or 6 pounds a month. So we had different groups here. They were doing what they were recommending. Those who lost from 20 to 30 pounds, so the first group would have gotten there in 3 months, the second group got there in 6 months, showed increased hemoglobin level. They weren't drying up, folks. They weren't getting puny. They weren't getting weak. Their hemoglobin level went up, which is a sign that they're getting healthier, better carrying oxygen. They have more energy. They're not getting anemic. These poor anemic vegans, you know, they can't do anything. Well, I'll tell you what, don't challenge one to a race because you maybe have your tongue hanging out trying to catch up. Those who lost this much weight increased hemoglobin. This one got my attention. Blood sugar levels of diabetic patients, obviously when they started the program, who lost 30 pounds or more were, you see that word? In his program, not even telling them what diet to be on, strictly timing. Okay, what was this man trying to prove? It's not what you eat, it's when you eat. And when you eat is actually more critical for a diabetic than even what they eat. Now, believe me, I believe that what you eat is also vital. I'm just sharing his research. But his research is so phenomenal that he shows me a point, and that is if a person even eats correctly and does it at the wrong time, they're not going to get the advantage. For example, if you eat 1 meal a day at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I take that group, and they will all lose weight on eating that 1 meal in the morning. You say, well, of course, they only eat 1 meal a day. I can take that same group and switch to a crossover study, and I can give them that same menu, that same amount of calories at 8 o'clock in the evening, and guess what will happen to that same group of people? They will all gain weight on me. Well, wait a minute. Same food, same calories, same person. It's all about timing. You can sabotage your best program even with a great vegan diet and even your steamed broccoli till it comes out your ears and still mess up. Timing is part of this whole story. And that is one part of the story that very few of your diabetic doctors are going to tell you about. And I'm tired of not being successful with my patients. So they get the whole story because they may not do it, but they do get the whole story. Down here, look at the side benefit. Hypothyroid patients showed a reduction in their medications. Now, wait a minute. I've got patients who have eaten this way, they're eating less food, they've lost weight, and they also get to reduce their medication. Quite an incredible combination. Dr. Capps showed when you eat is absolutely critical. BMI, body mass index. This is derived from your height and your weight. And by the way, it is fairly good for the American population. But if you're a football player, it's terrible. Because you weigh 275 pounds, and you're 6'3", and they're going to tell you you're grossly obese. Well, they're not. Because they have 6% body fat, and I don't want them running into me. I don't want to run into them either. The point I'm getting at is that this is good for most of us, but if you're really on the thin side, and if you're really on the high muscular side, this doesn't work. But for most of it, it works for. So, body mass index of less than 20 puts you at your relative risk of diabetes almost doesn't exist. It just people at that weight just don't have diabetes. 22.5, a slight amount. 3% at 27 BMI. Okay, what's a good BMI? Thank you. You're familiar with this. So somewhere between these two studies, and by the way, the white graph and the black graph are just two different studies. We're just putting two studies side by side. So at 27, I would be above the recommended BMI, and the people in that group have about 17, 18% of that group for diabetes. And you keep going up. At 32, BMI, you see the studies differed there. Only one study did a 37.5, and those people with over 40 BMI, look at the group. Almost 100%, almost everybody in that group was diagnosed diabetic. I proposed for you they were all diabetic and that we weren't diagnosing them correctly. So, let's look at a better chart. Maybe yeah, this one's a little bit larger. This is your BMI. You want to find out what your BMI is? And by the way, this is for men and for women. We use the same formula because we just go by height and weight. So, let's take me, okay? I'm 70 inches tall, and I come across here, and I'm weighing somewhere in here, so my BMI is probably about 21.5. So my risk of diabetes is much lower from that. Does that mean I get to go home tonight and have my banana split every night at 8 o'clock in the evening? No, I'd be totally foolish, because that would undo everything this chart is about. The area is broadening, and I get these questions quite a bit. What about stevia? What about the sugar alcohols, the mannitols, the sorbitols, the xylitols, okay? When it comes to the pancreas, it doesn't really care, because I'm looking for a response. It is true that stevia comes from a plant. So does arsenic. So you can't use that for your rule, okay? Stevia has no carb that sweetens on your tongue. Stevia has the same characteristics as my artificial sweeteners that stimulate the taste buds to make my brain think I'm getting sugar when I'm not. Now, the advantage to stevia is it's not a neurotoxin like Splenda and NutraSweet. Stevia probably has not the toxic side effects, but let me talk about the pancreas. When the tongue gets sweet put on it, you don't wait until it gets digested in your stomach and into your bloodstream before the pancreas takes action. See, neurologically, your pancreas gets stimulated to do something about its sugar far before the sugar even gets in your system. Therefore, if you take an artificial sweetener and you get the pancreas stimulation, and now you're putting this extra insulin in your bloodstream, what's going to happen to your blood sugar level? High insulin, your blood sugar is going to start to drop. You go, well, that's a good thing. Maybe I should eat more Splenda. No, you got neurotoxic effects, okay? But what do people do when their blood sugar starts to drop? Yep. Bend the elbow. So what have you got here? You've got the biggest ripoff that happened to the American people for the last 40, 50 years. This whole concept of artificial sweeteners making us all skinny. Tell me how it's worked out, folks. Have you noticed how skinny America's gotten over the last 30 years? We're just ready to blow away, aren't we? Those artificial sweeteners really worked. I get tired of this bogus. It is such, I wish people would rise up and rebel. And the way you rebel is with your wallet. You don't buy the junk. The men, women, whoever owns these food chains and these stores around you, Mr. Engel would not carry a product if you weren't buying it. I'll guarantee it. If you want your shelves to change in your store, stop buying something, and that's the quickest way to get it to change. But as long as we keep buying, they're going to keep providing. Did you notice the Splenda rollout this time? I watched these artificial. See, when I was in school, it was the saccharins and other cyclamates. And some of the research, I admit, was rather skewed, okay? It was a little bit too much. I mean, they literally would have to soak the rats in the solution to give them their diseases, okay? I mean, humans would never eat that much no matter what. So they had massive doses that wouldn't be appropriate for human health anyway. But I watched it, and then I watched NutraSweet come out. And they came out in these little packets and these little tiny boxes. Did you notice the Splenda rollout? They didn't start with the little boxes, folks. People went home with cartons. They already had you hooked. They did it already. They didn't have to take a chance on the marketing. Just get it out there and people will buy it. So they have us hooked. Well, I want to get unhooked. So here's your rat study to prove what I'm talking about. These rats, obviously in their cage, they had as much food delivered to that cage they could eat 24/7 if they chose to. Food was not the limitation. The natural sweetener was something I don't recommend. It was sugar water, white sugar water. White sugar in their water, and that's the water they had to drink, as compared to an artificial sweetener in their water, and that's what they had to drink. So this wasn't even, I mean, you know, they didn't give them blackstrap molasses or orange juice. No, they gave them white sugar to drink, water, flavored water. But look at it. Look at the rats here. The blue is the rats' consumption. Let's go to the next slide. Okay? The rats on the artificial sweeteners, that's the red group here, ate 3 times as much food as the rats on plain sugar water. I think this is a skewed study, because why don't they have some healthy food in there for the rat to eat than sugar water? But I was just showing you how far this is pushed. So this looks as bad as you can make it look for eating white sugar. But the artificial was 3 times worse. This is what happened to America. If you think that non-calorie drinks, non-calorie foods, low-calorie this, low that has helped us not become overweight, then you bought the lie. I've watched America continue to grow, and not taller, by the way. And so I see the problems. The last biggest problem that's come in, even past the Splenda, is high fructose corn syrup. It totally changes your metabolism, how your body uses carbs. And that is one of your major sweeteners, and they can still call it a natural sweetener. Do you know that? Because it comes from corn. Let's go on. Number of Americans consuming these sugar-free products, look what's happened. 70 million in 87, 160 million in 2000, and it hasn't slowed down. By the way, that was over half the population in 2000. Now, I'm going to estimate that we're probably somewhere around 250 million people. About 2/3 of our population use an artificial sweetener. Aspartame, NutraSweet. Aspartame is 2 protein molecules that take sweet on your tongue. Users have experienced fibromyalgia, spasms, shooting pains, numbness, cramps, vertigo, headaches, tinnitus. You folks want any of this stuff? How did it get past the FDA? I smile because some doctors have the nerve to say, well, Collins will use an herb and it's not passed by the FDA. Well, I consider that a compliment, because I always know something. When medicine is mixed with politics, the outcome, as far as I know, has never been good. That is a political organization. It is not a health organization. If you want health, I'm going to recommend you don't follow my government's recommendations for health, except the one on smoking. I think they got that one right. You go to Costa Rica. This, and I took pictures of this because it would probably be hard for you to believe. I probably should make them for the slide. I took pictures of what they have on the outside of their packages of cigarettes. My wife is here. She can back me up. I'm not just telling stories. Guess what they have on the outside of the packages of their cigarettes in Costa Rica? Lung cancer. I mean lungs, not this beautiful woman in Virginia Slims. They have the lungs and x-rays right on the package. I took pictures in the store. I go, can you believe this? Who would buy a box of lung cancer? I saw very few people smoking. I'm saying that's how much their government pushed it down the road. Now we have this warning. The Surgeon General. Well, hey, listen. Why do they blame it on him? Why don't they just say the government of the United States doesn't, you know. How about Splenda? Research reveals numbness in the legs of rats, enlarged livers, spleens, kidneys, male infertility, gastrointestinal problems during pregnancy, and greater caloric intake. Well, we proved the greater caloric intake 3 times. So, artificial sweeteners are not the answer. In fact, they're the demise. Artificial sweeteners have done more to promote diabetes than most other things because they cause insulin resistance. Diseases associated with a low-fiber diet, obviously constipation, appendicitis, diverticulosis, hiatus hernia, varicose veins, hemorrhoids, bowel cancer, colon polyps, heart disease, strokes, diabetes mellitus, and gallbladder disease. Remember I showed you that chart? Up here, we started in 1860 eating 53% of our diet was what they called starches. Well, starches for them was a potato, a sweet potato, corn on the cob, etc. And went all the way down to 10% of our diet. There's our problem right there. Now, before you think that I'm trying to take all your protein away and put you on a low-protein diet that you're going to just die from, I'm going to show you what a low-protein diet will do for you. A low-protein diet arrests kidney failure. Kidney failure. This person's ready for dialysis, okay? So, their kidney filtering ability, we would expect it to be over 100. These people on the normal American diet were about half of what their potential should be. They changed their diet, and you go, well, why didn't it go up? Well, I'm very thankful they still have some kidneys left after 1 year. You saved a patient from going on dialysis. Sometimes I wish I could just line up patients across and let them tell you, my liver was this, my kidneys were this, I did this, my ascites was this big, and now it's almost gone. I would like you to see what I get to see. I feel very privileged. And the privilege I feel is that I'm not working by myself because I see God's handwork. This isn't about Phil Collins. This is incredible when I see the power that God has still left in the human body for healing. That's the amazing part. Low-protein diet increases blood protein in diabetics. The temptation, and many people in the field fall for this. Well, your protein's very low. Therefore, we're going to give you more protein because your protein's low. Well, that makes perfect sense. If you've got something low, you want to fill it up. Not when it comes to diabetics. Not when it comes to humans. You don't want to put a human on that is low in blood protein on a high-protein diet. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Serum albumin, that's a protein, when they did the dietary change. So what they did is they put them on a low-protein diet, and amazing, after a year, the albumin level went from about 3.6 to about 4.2 in 1 year on a low-protein diet. If you will stop hurting the kidneys, they will respond. They actually heal. Amazing. I think I'm going to have to start calling my program the cow diet. If you eat like a cow, you'll probably be in pretty good shape. How about low-protein diet reduces urine protein? So now we're talking about losing it, not just the bloodstream. We call this microalbumin. 2,000 milligrams, so that'd be equivalent to 2 grams of protein they're losing out through their kidneys. And in 1 year, it drops down to about 100. Is 100 normal? No. 1720 is about normal. But from 2,000 to 100, that is amazing. So when you put a person, a diabetic, on a low-protein diet, guess why their protein level goes up? The slide's right in front of you. The protein level goes up because you stop losing the protein. You keep what you got on the inside because you're not damaging the kidney tubules anymore. You got healing on the inside. If I gave my diabetic patients more protein, what would I do to their blood? I'd cause more loss out through the kidneys, and I'd wind up with not only a diabetic, but now I need one on dialysis. Now I got a diabetic on dialysis. Have I done them a favor? You know, you go to the doctor, he puts you on anti-inflammatories and pain pills. Then you go back to the doctor the next day, he does the same thing. Then after 5 years of telling him your knee hurts and it's killing you, he goes, well, now you're ready for your knee replacement. Go, Doc, why didn't you tell me that 5 years ago? See, medicine is not about healing people. Medicine is about maintaining disease. I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to maintain disease. I'm trying to maintain and push people, obviously, to health. Low-protein diet reduces blood pressure in diabetics. One of the major problems with the eye in a diabetic. Blood pressure goes up. Any delicate organ, including the eye and the brain, is going to be wrong. So, on a low-protein diet, the systolic pressure goes down, and the diastolic, the bottom number, goes down. Okay. Some of you were in school and you learned about the 4 basic food groups. Meat, can you believe this? Here's America food group. That whole milk group. We had a whole meat group. Okay, half your diet is something you shouldn't be eating. So what about the other half? Well, you had the fruits and grains, and then you had cereals. It doesn't say how refined they were, whether it's white bread, white rice, whether it's jelly on my toast, that'd be a fruit, and if I have French fries for my vegetable. Well, I eat them with ketchup, that's tomatoes, isn't it? But look at the Chinese basic 4. Green leafy vegetables. By the way, this chart was made before the coronavirus, okay? Green leafy vegetables, soybean products, so from soy milk to tofu, sweet potatoes, and cereals. You go, incredible. That has got to be so low in protein, no wonder they're so short. No, folks, that's not low in protein. Let me show you. Here is the protein breakdown from what they eat. Green leafy vegetables, 500 grams a day. Well, we usually don't think in grams. A pound is 454 grams, so a little bit over a pound of vegetables. You know, a pint is a pound, so therefore we're talking 2 cups. We're not talking. This is not major food. Soybean products, 60 grams, 2 ounces, not major. Sweet potatoes, somewhere near a pound, less than a pound, and their rice and their other grains, about a pound. Look over here. Green leafy vegetables, obviously not high in protein. Come down here, soybean products, 18, sweet potatoes, 8, and they get most of their protein from their grains at 40. They are 71 grams of protein, and I showed you a slide this morning that we expect an adult to be 25 to 30 grams. The American standard for the adult male is 56 grams, and for the adult female, 44 grams. So there's a bunch of high-protein Chinese over there. I also showed you that if you're going to be higher on the protein, you get it from a vegetable source, and it won't cause disease. So this is an animal-based protein. I just want to let you know those people can get adequate protein from their basic diet with no problem, and you could if you choose to do the same. My star pupil, cabbage. One reason I like cabbage is it keeps you from being hungry. And a lot of you are getting worried about that. Cabbage takes about 4 hours to go through your stomach. You can learn a lot from communism, you know. One thing I learned from communism is that you can get more work out of a man for less money and less food if you feed him 2 basic foods. It's called borscht. Some of you may have some Russian heritage, I don't know. But borscht is basically a soup made out of what? Beets and cabbage. Very economical food. You can get a man to work longer and harder with less input of food on those 2 foods than anything else. So let me learn a lesson. I'm not communist, by the way. My goal is I want to learn from anyone who's willing to teach me something. And so what I learned from them is that I want to put a person on a program that does need to lose weight, but I still can nourish them and they can still work well. I'm going to learn from them. Here's one of your foods that stays in the stomach for about 4 hours. That's why you don't get hungry when you eat your cabbage. And that is most of people's fear, because they go, oh, I'm going to get hungry. Well, if I've got a food that can help you not be hungry and still nourish you well with nutrition without giving you too much fuel, then I've got a pretty good combination. This is one of them. Benefits include treatment of cancer, diabetes, heart disease, headaches. This is snake oil. I mean, you folks, you look like I'm trying to sell a bill of... But what am I really selling here? I'm selling a food that decreases your inflammation. That's all I'm doing here. And God knows what's best. If I can decrease the inflammation in your body, you can stop disease. No, don't think I'm going to live to 120. Well, not in this world. The point is, I believe that sin is taking its toll. But at the same time, I don't want it to take any more toll than what it has to. Headaches, excessive weight, skin disorders, eczema, jaundice, scurvy, rheumatism, arthritis, gout, eye disorders, constipation, stomach ulcers, Alzheimer's disease. Tell you what, the farmers see better by, if they just made cabbage pills, they may be able to. Food processing. How you process your food determines your blood sugar response. This is a non-diabetic chart, but we can still glean some information. For example, whether we have a whole apple, whether we take that apple and make it into applesauce, or whether we take that same apple and squeeze it and make apple juice, here is your blood sugar responses, and here's what happens to you. Now, studies are Puritan, you don't get to eat anything else. This isn't part of a whole meal. This is if I give you an apple to eat and you sit there and you eat the apple. Or if I give you whatever the equivalent amount of applesauce or apple juice. But look, here's our blood sugar levels. We're around 70. We all go up to about 86, 87, all about the same. And then the key I'm pointing out is the top gray line comes down and levels out again over a 3-hour period. Look at what the applesauce does. It comes down, drops down almost into the 60s, doesn't stay in the 70s, and then finally look at the apple juice. It drops down to 50. When your blood sugar is 50, what are you feeling like, folks? So juices will tend to make you want to eat more, if that's all you eat. Now, let's be fair. What if this is part of a meal? Well, the other foods are going to buffer it. It's going to be different. But as far as juice only, will cause a hypoglycemic response because juice causes an overreaction of the pancreas to this and drops the sugar this low. And even after 3 hours, you're not up to where you started from. So juices are not viable food for diabetics. If you're not diabetic and you like juice, make sure you're taking it with something else. We'll show you what buffer foods are all about in just a minute. Results of blood sugar control for type 1 diabetics. We switched to type 1 here. Most of the time I'm talking about type 2. Controlling blood sugar or control for diabetics, you can reduce the diabetic retinopathy. So we can reduce the eye damage by 76%. That's significant. We can reduce 50%, 54% of the kidney disease. We can reduce the peripheral neuropathies. And we can reduce cardiovascular disease by 1/3. Exercise does make a difference. Exercise burns glucose. Your muscles can burn glucose. We're going to show you an exercise technique, and some of you already heard of it. It's called burst training, because that is the fastest way to burn glucose by your muscle. We'll go through that. This chart shows calories of exercise per week. Now, don't get discouraged here, but you burn about 100 calories per mile. And you go, is that 3,500 miles? You expecting me to walk 35 miles this week? Well, if you want to go home, no, you have a car. My point is that the more diabetics walked, the more glucose they burned. And they decreased their risk of becoming diabetic. Now, this was just an exercise where the person was burning this much fuel. I chose walking. I think my next slide is going to show you equivalence, okay? Time or distance equivalent to walking a mile. If you jog a mile or walk a mile, you burn the same amount of fuel. And you go, no, you can't, Doc. I go, yeah, you do. I get there in 15 minutes I'm walking. You get there in 8 minutes because you're jogging. But you still move this much body that far, and that's what burned fuel is about. Biking for 3 miles, swimming for 10 minutes, equivalent to walking a mile, rowing machine, stationary bike, aerobics 20 minutes, active tennis. If you play tennis, always find somebody better than you. You're right, I want you to get run around the court, okay? If you're the guy or lady who's better at it, then you don't get as much exercise. The point is to get exercise. And active racquetball, the same thing applies. I don't know where they got this information from, but when I played racquetball in college, I got more workout than 1 mile in 20 minutes. So I don't know if they're wimping out on me or what they're doing here, but anyway. The Adventist Health Study shows some interesting data. Meat and death from diabetes. People gave their life to be on this chart, okay? So the risk ratio of Seventh-day Adventist men, the ones that used meat less than once per week or less, their risk ratio was 1. Risk ratio means not a specific number, but how many in this group that ate meat less than once a week died from diabetes, as compared to this group here that ate meat basically daily, 6 or more times per week, was almost 4 times more. Does meat affect diabetes? There's no doubt. And it's dose related. Obviously, the more we eat, the more risk we have. Good sources of soluble and insoluble fiber. We set a goal of fiber intake between 40 to 60 grams of fiber a day. If you want a good fiber chart, just Google it, okay? I've got some charts in here that I'll be glad to show you, but what you're looking for is between 40 to 60 grams of fiber a day. Here's a few examples. 10 dried, well, most people don't eat that many dried figs, but if you ate 10 of them soluble, this is the one that helps your blood sugar, is a soluble fiber. The insoluble one helps things be more consistent. How's that? So, dried figs, 5.7 and 9.9. Well, if I only want 40 a day, I could eat 40 figs. No, I don't do that, okay? A cup of garbanzo beans or chickpeas, 8.6 and 15.4. A cup of lima beans, 8.9 and 24. Soybeans dry, well, you know, you ladies do the cooking. Dry soybeans, if you go to cook those, it's going to be at least 3 times that by the time you make a soup or something with them. And most people don't eat, or here's kidney beans, 1 cup. Most people don't eat a cup of grits not cooked. What I'm saying, this is all dry, okay? And a cup of carob flour, that's a lot of carob flour, okay? But carob has 30 grams of soluble and 10 grams of insoluble. Or at the bottom part here, insoluble, wheat bran is 11, dried coconut, pistachio nuts, black-eyed peas, almonds, lentils, and corn bran, excuse me. Most people don't use corn bran, but if you did, 1 cup of that per day would take care of you. Anyway, I'm trying to show you it's not as hard to get fiber when you go with high fiber foods. Now, what have we gained? What do we know? Number 1, the diabetic benefits of a high carb, high fiber diet. Dr. James Anderson out of Louisville, Kentucky is an endocrinologist that started his HCF diet, high complex carbohydrate, high fiber diet, and it's probably been 40 years ago. I'm going to show you some of his results in just a minute because I want to show you what his program can do. But that's where this came from. Benefits of high carb and high fiber. Reduced levels of serum cholesterol and triglycerides. Reduced blood pressure for those that had high blood pressure. Promotes discontinuation of insulin therapy for non-insulin dependent diabetics. This would be considered a type 2 diabetic. Reduces the risk of death from heart disease. Improves gastrointestinal function. Reduces body weight in those that are overweight. Reduces the risk of diabetic damage, of kidney damage. Reduces insulin requirements. When you reduce insulin requirements, that means your body doesn't need as much and you're getting more sensitive to what your body produces. And glycemic control, another way of saying your blood sugar is doing better. Here's Bill. Bill went on the program that I just told you about. The high complex carbohydrate, the high fiber diet. He weighed in at 198 pounds. His blood sugar was 288. That's not a hard diagnosis, folks. That's not even on the fence. His cholesterol level was 278. His triglycerides, his blood fat that was floating around his bloodstream, was 645. But he was your neighbor that exercised. You thought Bill was doing great. He walked 5 miles a week. You'd see him out there every morning walking his mile, and you'd say, look at that guy. He's doing good. A little bit chunky, but he's doing good, you know. No, Bill was ready to have an emergency. 5 weeks on the program I just told you about. His weight dropped about 19 points, okay, 179. His glucose went to 114. His diagnosis point would have been 126. In 5 weeks' time, going from a blood sugar level of 288, he is now considered not a diabetic. 5 weeks, folks. Last night I brought up the guy who said he was willing to eat cardboard. And he really meant it in a way that he said, listen, I'm retired, I have finances, but you can't buy your health back, can you? And that's what he came and said, this is what I want. And I'm willing to do anything to get my health back. I didn't take advantage of the man. I didn't feed him charcoal for a month. Cardboard for a month. What I did do, though, is showed him a pathway where he could get some of his goals. Triglyceride, in 5 weeks, triglycerides went from 645 to 103. It's believable. It works. How many of you have watched Forks Over Knives? Well then, I guess hopefully you believe that when you see it. They put those firemen on the program, what happens to them? They sit there and go, hey, this guy's not the unusual or the exception of the rule. But look what happened to his miles. Now Bill's out there putting in 33 miles a week. So he's out there walking for an hour a day or whatever. After 1 year, he is down to 158 pounds. His blood sugar level is 87. His cholesterol is 133. His triglycerides are 93. And he's still putting in his miles. That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. But Bill is not unusual. He has walked away from the major diseases, the cancer, the heart disease, and the diabetes that's plaguing this country. And he was willing to do it. And I will guarantee you that his program that he put him on was not more expensive than what he was eating before. In fact, he might be saving a little money on his food budget. Sugar, blood sugar of diabetics with a low and a high fiber diet. The interesting thing about this slide is they were eating the same foods, just changed the fiber content. And you go, what do you mean? Well, they probably had bran to make this work. Okay, but look what happened. Start here in the morning, breakfast, 7 a.m. breakfast. The ones that they added more fiber to the diet, their blood sugar still went up above 220. Now I consider that terrible, okay? The blood sugar of the low fiber group went to about 280. You go, well, that's not good at all. Of course, mid-morning, blood sugars are coming back down. We eat lunch, and what happens? The high fiber group don't go up as high as they went for breakfast, but the low fiber group jumps up to above 300. And by the time we get our evening meal, the high fiber group comes up a little bit higher again and drops off. Look what the low fiber diet does. That's just difference in fiber. So when I recommend 40 to 60 grams of fiber a day, this is the kind of chart, even though I would like you to be below 200, that you're going to get. Not up here at 400 before you come back down. This is a little bit closer to home. This is Duke University. Dr. Kempner, back in the late 40s, came to our country after World War II. Was a German physician who came over and basically put Duke on the map. He was treating not diabetics, or not directly. He was treating what they called malignant hypertension. And the reason they called it malignant hypertension because there was nothing they could do to bring it down. These people were losing their vision. They were going on dialysis. They were basically watching their body being torn apart within themselves. And guess what he did for them? It was so simple that most people, and many of them, didn't stay on it. But the ones that stayed on it, we're going to take a look at this. He fed them white rice, which I'm not recommending. I think there's a better option there, at least brown, and fruit. That was breakfast. For lunch, they had fruit and rice. And in the evening, so you wouldn't get bored, they went back to rice and fruit again. That was the original Dr. Kempner diet. Now, if you go online, look up Duke diet now, you're going to see that they got more vegetables and some other things. But that was the original diet to get the original results and gave people back their life. So here he was trying to lower people's blood pressure. By the way, there was no sodium, there was no salt in this program. He gave people back their life again. You should read the reports of the damage to the retina that was healed on this program, and those people walked out of there with their vision again. There's very few doctors that probably get more esteem than a retinologist or someone who gives you back your eyes again. Unfortunately, I suffered a torn retina, and I'm very grateful for the man who put my eye back together. And yes, I can see with both eyes, and I'm grateful. That's what American medicine gets a gold star for. We are absolutely phenomenal. We just really don't do well with lifestyle diseases. Back to Dr. Kempner. Developed the program over the years. Here is an indication of some of his patients that he treated. Ones that came in with insulin. Either they needed it or they didn't. We're not debating whether they're type 1 or type 2. But it's a 4-week program he had them on. 4 weeks, 38%, almost 40% of that group were off insulin in 4 weeks. Decreased insulin, we expect all the rest of them, which they were. If they came in on just oral medication, 80% of the people left there with no medication. 4 weeks. Right here at Duke, good North Carolina. 15% decreased their oral medications, and 5% stayed the same. Once again, it's possible. It works. People right now are at clinics becoming non-diabetics today, as you're hearing me. I'm not going to take time with a lot of these fiber slides, but you can go to Google, you can collect these. But soluble is the fiber like in oatmeal. You know when you overcook your oatmeal, it turns into Elmer's glue? Okay, that's a soluble fiber. It's kind of tacky, kind of sticky. The insoluble one is going to be like your wheat bran. It goes in, it comes out the same way it goes in. The digestive system doesn't bother. It's good for bulk, and that's what you need it for. Notice when God made food, He put both of them in the same food. So one is not essential and one is absolutely essential. It's just the water-soluble one will lower your cholesterol levels because it binds with your bile salts and carries them out of your body. Cholesterol is such a unique chemical in the body, and it's the only one that I know of in biochemistry that the body can't break down. Once your body builds cholesterol, it doesn't have the ability to break it down. Most everything else the body makes, it builds it up, it can break it down, it can use it for other, but not cholesterol. The only way you get cholesterol out of your body is either change it to something else. Either change it to hormones, either change it to vitamin D. All these are based on cholesterol. Or you eliminate it out through your liver, out through your bile duct system. It gets out there in your small intestine, and then you've eaten your oatmeal, your apple that morning. Those water-soluble fiber binds with the cholesterol, and you eliminate it. That's the way you get rid of your cholesterol out of your body. So, asparagus, a half a cup of asparagus, total fiber is 2.8, and it's divided up in soluble and insoluble. But you come down your list here. If you ate a half a cup of asparagus, you have almost 3 in. A half a cup of broccoli, you're over 5 already. A half a cup of Brussels sprouts, you're at 9. Well, man, you're heading towards your 40 without even thinking about it. So in one meal, you can have 20 or 30 grams without trying that hard. And these are all half cups. Well, I'd like a whole cup of asparagus. That's pretty good stuff. And whether you're eating your corn, your carrots, whatever. Let's see if we can find a real high. Okay, frozen peas. Well, peas are peas, whether they're frozen or not when it comes to fiber. But a half a cup of peas, that's what I had for lunch. I got 4.3 grams of fiber and wasn't even thinking about it. My half a cup of sweet potato. Who eats only half a cup of sweet? I want at least a cup of sweet potato. So that would be 8. You see, what I'm talking about, 40 sounds like a big number. It's really relatively easy when you're eating plant-based. Raw vegetables, whether it's cabbage, carrots, celery, cucumbers, etc., etc. Red apples. By the way, I don't expect you to memorize these. We won't test. Okay. Let me go to legumes. Notice that your beans are one of your best sources of fiber. Your beans are your highest fiber food. Not your celery, not your salads, not your fruit, not your other vegetables. Beans, black beans, 6.1. Black-eyed peas, 4.7 in a half a cup. Chickpeas, kidney beans, almost 8 in a half a cup. Okay, what's the joke?
I'm trying to take pictures of the screen.
My, all right. I'll take your word for it. I made my point. Okay. Whether you can get actually, and I'm not Italian, I'd probably get hit if I said this, there is good whole grain pasta. There's even good pea pasta out there. If you want something in the shape of pasta, you can even work on that. Okay. Let's keep going. I've got more to cover. Here we are. Buffer foods. This is an important concept because most always we eat in complete meals. We don't drink an apple juice. We don't eat applesauce all by itself. We don't eat an apple and nothing else. So that's kind of what science does. They pick stuff apart so hard it's not reasonable. When you deal with buffer foods, there are foods that slow down the absorption of glucose. So when you eat a meal, if you put peanut butter on your toast, you will slow down how fast the carbs in the toast are absorbed. So the value of buffer foods allows you to eat different types of food than feeling so limited that I only have to eat fat and protein, that it limits the body's ability to absorb it, and therefore your pancreas can keep up with the load. See, most of you make plenty of insulin. That's not the problem. It's that the problem is you put way too much carb load on your body at a point in time and you can't handle it. So this is part of your carb load. So fats in any form diminish the absorption of glucose. And that doesn't include French fries, by the way. Protein in any form, vegetable or animal, of course, we already went through that. We like the vegetable, will decrease the absorption of glucose. And your complex carbs, the higher fiber, the complex carbs will decrease how fast glucose goes in. So, I've got a question for you. Is there one food that qualifies for all three? Oh, come on, folks. I just spent the last 5 minutes talking about it. Don't say cabbage, even though that would qualify. Beans. Beans have protein, beans have fat, and beans are high complex carb. This is why Dr. James Anderson program, that report card that I showed you about Mr. Bill, guess what Mr. Bill was eating? Beans in any way, shape, or form he wanted them. A buffer food that's high in fiber that allowed his pancreas to heal. Sample menu. I made this one up. The reason I tend not to hand out menu sheets is because most of the time they get filed in a circular file, okay? The other reason is because I want this program to be yours, because there's no golden menu that works or doesn't work. What we do have is principles. And the principles, as I'm trying to teach this weekend, will get you to this. For example, we gave a cup of oat bran. Well, why did I pick oat bran? Well, I'm trying to lower their cholesterol. I still get nourishment. I increase my fiber. Your soy milk, your whole wheat toast with nut butter, your fruit, etc., etc. Lunch, a cup of beans, 2 cups of steamed vegetables, your choice, a half a cup of rice, and salad. In the evening, if you're having a third meal, a cup of vegetable soup, 2 cups of salad with a half a cup of beans or peas on it, whole wheat crackers, etc. This is just a sample. If you don't like that menu, that's fine. You don't have to eat anything on there because God gave us literally thousands of choices. We're not limited on food. In fact, right now in America, as easy as it to be unhealthy in this country, we have never had a time when we had it easier to be healthy in this country. How many of you grew up as a kid 60 years ago as a vegetarian? Some of you. Yeah, I was weird too, okay? You know, I had friends and they called me a variety of names. One of them was Cabbage Head, you know. And we got along just fine. You know, that's when we were politically incorrect and we enjoyed it, okay? And we settled things out behind the barn, and no one went home and told, or your parents didn't sue mine. Okay, those were the good days. And yes, I probably got my share of licks, and I probably handed out a few. But I wasn't really the best evangelist then because, see, I didn't tell you what I called them. Because they called me Cabbage Head and I called them Porkies. And so that's how we got along back then. And we both had a good time and rode on. But I had a really hard time eating at their houses because, you know, when you're a vegetarian kid and Mom makes a veggie patty, you eat the whole thing. Well, see, that doesn't work out when you get into a meat, you know. You've got to figure out where the bones are and where the knuckles are and where the, you know, all the cartilage is. And here I'm, you know, trying to figure out how to do this, and it never worked out that well for me. So I know I'm biased. I don't think meat tastes good. I don't think it smells good. I really don't even care for it. So that's how biased I am, okay? So I'm truly a genetic vegetarian, okay? The RAVE program. This is the program that was developed as a result of Dr. Esselstyn and Dr. Campbell. It's just another way that we've said over and over again. You are familiar with the New Start program. You're familiar with what people and other people have done. This is just their attempt to say the same thing. But the interesting thing about everybody saying the same thing, when I was at Loma Linda back in the 70s, Nathan Pritikin had developed a way of reversing heart disease. Nathan Pritikin wasn't a medical doctor with no medical background, but he had a good mind and he was an engineer. And so what did he do? The first thing he did, he passed my first test because he did it to himself and he beat the system. He unblocked his coronary arteries. And by the time I heard him at Loma Linda, he came and spoke to us one year when I was a student there. And he made a very interesting comment. He said, I've read your little red books and I follow them. But then the next statement let me know that he really didn't understand and didn't have the picture. But I don't believe in your God. And I went, you've missed everything. I mean, if you take God out of your equation about being healthy, you have missed everything. Guess how Nathan Pritikin died? Acute lead poisoning. He killed himself. Health without God just means you're a more successful sinner. Never say that someone else has got your health message unless they have your Savior. See, I hear that so much. Oh, they would do this or they would do that or someone's stealing our... No one can steal your health message because your health message should be leading people to service of Jesus Christ. If it's not, then you have missed the whole weekend here. Yes, I've got medical knowledge, but medical knowledge only should lead you to taking better care of this major asset, your temple, that God's got you given. Now, let's take a look at their program. The RAVE program, R-A-V-E, the R is avoid refined foods. Well, I don't know why they just don't call it the R program, because everything else is getting rid of refined foods, you know. So they could have the R program. What if you ate nothing that was refined? Then you would be on a whole food, plant-based diet. Animals are highly refined. Did you notice that? How much broccoli does a cow have to eat to make 1 pound of steak? That's a highly refined product. It's also no fiber. So to make sure that we don't get confused here, they add the A. And the A is avoid refined animal product. No, all animals are refined. So he wants to avoid those. And then the V gets most of us right between the eyes. And we have a real hard time on this because you've been sold a bill of goods that olive oil is somehow healthy for you. That's what you've been sold, right? Am I wrong? You've been told that olive oil is good for you. Okay, well, not when you're trying to reverse disease. Here's what we don't know. If when you were born and you ate healthfully, plant-based diet, and if you had the equivalent of 1 teaspoon or 1 tablespoon of olive oil every day of your life and had nothing more, nothing less, I can't tell you. I don't have that research. The research I'm showing you here is people that are over here that have diabetes, heart disease, and cancer to bring them back over here. I always believe you have to be more strict to bring people back than what you have to keep them. In other words, prevention should be less expensive and less trauma to you than trying to correct my health problem and bring me back. This program is to bring people back. Avoid vegetable oils. Coconut, olive, rapeseed, canola oil, whatever you want to talk about here. And then the E, they have no exceptions and no excuses. And of course, I couldn't leave up an opportunity. I got to use E for exercise, okay? That's a Collins slide. That's not part of their program, although I don't believe they would disagree. So to nail it and to summarize it, you don't cure diabetes without taking care of your blood pressure, and you don't take care of your blood pressure without taking care of diabetes. And if you take care of diabetes, you take care of your heart disease. And if you take care of heart disease, you're getting my point? There is one common denominator to all diseases. It's called inflammation. When you eat an anti-inflammatory diet, when you live a, quote, anti-inflammatory lifestyle, you get rid of a host diseases. There's not one diet for lowering your cholesterol. There's not one diet for helping your diabetes. There's not another diet for heart disease. So we don't need the Heart Association to tell me what to eat. Besides, they got it wrong anyway. We don't need the Diabetic Association to tell me what to eat. It's a diabetic. Why do we have all these associations? Why does the Cancer Society make dietary recommendations? There's only one diet that helps all these problems. And we've been talking about it. I think that's my last slide. No, it's not. Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison, the doctor of the future. And what was his future? He died in 31, okay? The doctor of the future will give no medicine. Amazing. But will interest his patients in the care of the human frame, in proper diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease. If you don't get the right answer, you will never get the right solution. So, your turn. We'll open up for questions. We have a microphone, and it's as much for my benefit and my ears as for yours, so I appreciate you using it. This lady right here.
Okay. What about organic? Like organic vegetables
Okay.
versus...
First of all, organic is a certification by your government. If you are an organic farmer, that's different, or if you have a local farm. But the organic certification means they can use certain insecticides and certain pesticides that qualify by their standards. That's why I said I don't like government being involved with my food. Okay. But in general, organic food has been shown not to have more nutrients in it, unless you're growing it in your own garden, but it's usually have less of the big bad chemicals in. That's your advantage. But when I see the price tag, I feel we're still ripping people off. So, if you had liver cancer and you came to me, I would highly recommend you avoid as much of the chemicals that I want you to have, and I would highly recommend that you do organic. Now, a lot of things, if you grow a garden, you realize that you can grow things organic very easily, and other things just love bugs, okay? Greens are one of the things you can grow very easily with very few bugs, all on your own, without putting anything on it. My dad was an organic farmer. You know what he used on his crops? He would take cigarette butts and soak them in water. And all that good nicotine that you didn't want in your lungs, guess what he did? He fed them to the bugs. And that's how he dealt with his bug population. Amazing. The good news was that after a decent rain, the nicotine's water soluble and will wash off. But that's how he took care of his bugs. Go ahead.
As Adventists, we've eaten a lot of soy products, but
Yes.
I have heard, this is just hearsay, soy products, maybe stay away from them.
Okay, let's go
soy
back to-
milk, we don't use soy, or tofu. I mean, should we stay away from that stuff?
Okay, let's talk about soy products, and let's go back to the research. In 1950, the people who ate the most soy had the least amount of cancer. So I go back to Japan. Like I said, they were my poster child. And I move forward and I see something changing. The populations who ate the most soy stopped eating that and started eating more beef, etc., etc., etc. So I watch them march away from that. Now I have this whole movement, and I hear these articles. I mean, it sounds terrible, that soy does this, and soy does that, and soy increases Alzheimer's, and soy causes young boys to develop in ways they shouldn't develop. And I'm going, wait a minute, whoa, wait a minute. You see, in my family, I was the soy baby. That's what I was called, okay? My older brother was probably the cow baby. I came along, I was the soy baby. My younger brother was probably the goat baby. So you know what kind of animals we had around the farm, okay. My older brother and my younger brother both had their tonsils taken out. And the only thing I was upset about is they got to eat more ice cream when they came from the hospital than what was given to me. Okay? I'm the only one that still has his tonsils. My brothers get sick probably 2 and 3 times more than I do. So I'm very thankful. But let's talk about soy for a minute, because there are some things I want you to avoid. First of all, I'm not talking about soy milk. I'm not talking about tofu. Even though by this chart here, tofu is a refined food. When you make tofu, you throw away some of the complex carbs and you increase what's left, the fat and the protein component. So soybeans are 33% fat, 33% carbohydrate, and 34% protein. So they're about a third each, an incredible food. When you make tofu, you boost the fat content to 51%. You boost the protein up a few percent, and you throw away, what you throw away is carb, if you've ever made your own tofu. Tofu is still not bad. It's just it may not be best for a person trying to overcome diabetes and get there quicker. What I want you to watch for is all the new protein foods, the soy foods that have come in. 2 labels I want you to have. Soy protein isolate. Leave that in the store. And soy protein concentrate, leave that in the store. Your entomamis, you know, your beans that haven't got, your soybeans haven't gotten dry, look like little small little lima beans, awesome. You're eating the whole food. Those are nothing but soy. It won't give little boys breast. It won't make you ladies have problem with your menopause. It won't make you have breast cancer. That's all bogus, because they don't tell you the whole story. Because they'll come out with their research, and they've done research on soy protein isolate products, and then they blame the whole soy on that one misconception. So the first thing you always ask when they say soy, what type? Where'd you get it from? What is the chemistry of it? And you guys are incredible. The news is incredible. We've got reporters talking to researchers, and you may get the information before I may read it in a scientific journal now. That's how fast it moves. But I'm also dealing with people who don't have a background in statistics, who don't know epidemiology, and they're just verbally coming out. I'm going, they don't know what they're talking about, because you can't have a person talk about the sciences unless you understand how the sciences work. And we have a lot of reporters who don't understand epidemiology. That's why we get all this nonsense about this virus. They use the wrong words, they use the wrong names, and I think it's quite a fair amount of fear technique. Back to soy. Stay away from those 2 compounds. You'll find they're in a lot of your smart dogs and smart this and smart stuff you get in the store. But it is not in tofu, it is not in soy milk, and it is definitely not, obviously, in your eating the whole bean. So I'm going to encourage you to eat soy. I think it's a healthy food. Okay, go ahead.
This is for my kids. You know, they like to work out. You know, they like to lift weights.
Great.
And like my son, that was here, like he had a personal trainer, and you know, he was telling him, you know, since you're building muscle and bulking up, you know, you need all this protein.
Right.
No, right?
It's a fallacy. But let me tell you why it's a fallacy. Because it's a misunderstanding. If you give a person 20 grams of protein and put them in the gym a half hour, 45 minutes later, they will bench press more than if they don't do that. So what goes through their mind? This stuff makes me strong. This stuff makes me able to lift. I'm saying, hey, you really want to lift? Here's some methamphetamine. This will really help you lift. And they go, man, you're being nasty. I'm going, no, you're missing my point. Protein, that's highly concentrated is a metabolic stimulant. You are not really able to lift that much. You are fooling yourself. And so because it gives them a stimulation effect, they assume it's good, and that's the next thing they're wrong on. If you want big muscles, it takes very few grams of protein a day to build that muscle. Now, the younger a young man is, his testosterone is probably higher. He's going to build more bulk than if I go and work out the same amount of time and lift the same amount of weights for me right now. So you guys, you young guys, go for it. You're going to get muscles quicker than any of us can, okay? But the point is that protein is messing up these people. And I have been rewarded, because I've been around long enough, where a man came in to my office, he's a patient of mine, and said, when you lectured at my church this many years ago, he said, I knew you didn't even have a clue when you finished your protein lecture. And so I smiled about that. Guess what he's seeing me for? Kidney damage. He goes, when you left there that day, he said, I said to my weightlifting buddy, this doc, he's wacky. Well, that probably won't be the first person, but I'm old enough now that I don't have to worry about that kind of comments. The point is, we have used protein inappropriately in America since America began. You know, we've been on an animal-based program. I'm going to push it one step further. We don't have a food shortage in this world. We have plenty of food to feed our 7 billion people. You know how we can do that? Stop feeding the animals and start feeding people. 85% of your soy, 85% of your corn goes to feed animals. Right now in America, if we would cut out the animal interface, this one country, our country, with 330 million people, can feed over 1 billion people in our world right now without producing 1 ounce more food in our fields. So, if you want to be an environmentalist, and if you want to hug trees, and you want to do all this stuff, that's good. I'm an environmentalist because I believed I need to take care of God's children. And the best way to take care of God's children is don't visit McDonald's. That, if you really want to take care of your environment, you would become a vegan. Because the pollution of that animal and the carbon dioxide they put off and all this stuff they do that we think of, all this carbon dioxide load, guess what the major contributor is? It's not your airplane. It's not your semi on the road. It's raising animals. Anyway, I'll try to get off my soapbox a little bit.
How do we season our beans if we don't use olive oil?
Oh, ma'am, you make it easy. I'm sure there's 10 ladies who could stand up and tell you how they do their beans. And basically, the simplest ones that I know of any herb you want that you happen to like the flavor of already, if you like to cook them with your onions or your garlic or whatever. My wife's here. I should let her answer the food questions. But
So we don't need any oil?
not at all. Don't waste your oil there.
Is liquid fish oil good for us?
No, ma'am. That is worse than even olive oil. By the way, here's another hoax, okay? They have you believing that fish oil and omega-3 fats from fish help to reduce your coronary heart disease. No one ever asked the right questions. How long do Eskimos live? The average lifespan is 43 years. Folks, something's not working out for them too well. And then they want to pan off on me and tell me I have to use fish oil to get my omega-3s. Now, why do we need omega-3s? You know why we need omega-3s? Because we're not eating the proper diet to start with. And so we keep pushing all this flax and chia and all those good seeds on people, which, by the way, are good. But you don't need all the flax and chia when you start eating right, because you don't have to have so many omega-3s to cut out the inflammation, because you're not eating an inflammatory diet. You see how this picture starts building and putting together?
Do you sell this?
Do I sell this?
This.
Right here in the back. I got people who are live streaming this and recording this. So
Yeah, we're
let Steve take care of
we're
that.
taping this, so you'll be able to. And we're live streaming it? Yeah.
So I don't know how far it's going to go. We'll find
see
out.
what we can do.
I need this.
John?
Could you comment on 3 items: glyphosate, blue zones, and meat substitutes?
Okay. Meat substitutes, I covered that already with the soy base. As a general rule, most meat substitutes are one or two. They're going to be gluten-based or they're going to be soy-based. Both are refined foods. Both are harder to digest than the real food. I'm not against gluten. I'm not against whole grains. I'm not against whole wheat. I think they're a healthy food. But I think that some people have a hard time tolerating them. And some people, and they probably told you, this is harder for me to digest than the chicken I'm eating over here. So digestibility, how it works in your system, don't spend your money and pay 5 times as much as you need to. You know, I said, if you're broke, okay, if you will buy 5 pounds of beans and 5 pounds of brown rice, I can keep you alive longer on that $10 you spend than any other $10 you can spend. Simple is usually always better. Okay, blue zones is a term that we use to indicate people who live over 100 years of age. I was in Loma Linda for years. The place is utterly polluted. My wife, when we drove over the mountain and came into Loma Linda, she's quite expressive, okay? We're driving down the freeway. We're in our little Toyota pickup truck. She's hollering at the people in the next car over, "Can't you see this stuff? You live in this stuff." It was smog, folks. So we moved out of Loma Linda, moved to Calamasa, and looked down on the smog. And on the bad days, it would catch us. And she says, "Can't you go to Andrews? Don't they have your program at Andrews? Do we have to live here?" Now, we were married for all of 2 weeks. You know, you at least try to be, accommodating. We stuck it out. It is amazing. There is mountains around Loma Linda that you will never see until it gets to about October, maybe November. And there's San Gorgonio, Snow Peak, beautiful, 10,000 plus feet. Well, we stuck it out, to tell you the long story, and we even stayed there a little bit longer because both of our last clinicals hired us, and we were out there. She was in Downey, just below LA, and I was in Westminster, and we stayed there until our daughter, who you met earlier today with the baby dedication, came along, and I said, "We're not raising kids in Southern California. We're going home," and home is East Coast. So blue zones have to do with people living over 100, and it has more to do with what they eat than where they live. Loma Linda, classic example. We have, in Loma Linda was one of the sites. Costa Rica was another site. But I propose to you that your blue zone needs to be your kitchen. And doesn't have to be a blue kitchen. It's what you put in the fridge. It's what you have in your cabinets, because there's no secret to these blue zones. They can be, folks, as far as pollution, North Carolina has more good water and good air than Southern California can ever hope for. So you've got the environment much superior. Now, produce there, I do miss that. I was spoiled. We had strawberries that are as big as you get here that say in California, only they were real berries, not cardboard like you get here. California shouldn't send anything out of state unless it's totally ripe and they couldn't last too long. We had the berries that you see that look good on the outside. They were better than that on the inside. And 3 of them would fill a cup. When we'd go buy cantaloupes, I'd buy a dozen cantaloupes. They would charge me $3, and because they're trying to get rid of them, they'd throw a baker's dozen. They'd give me a couple. We'd walk in a store, and they'd have hundreds, literally hundreds of pounds of grapes on a table. And folks, housing is expensive there, but if you're a vegan in Southern California, you can clean up, and your food budget would probably be minimal. So there's your blue zones. Blue zones need to happen for you personally. And what was the other one? You talking about Roundup?
In Roundup, they
Yeah.
use it to ripen crops from 2 weeks down to 3 days, and then the byproducts end up on our table.
Yeah, I live in a tobacco-growing part of Madison County where I live, and I always wonder how much is getting into the streams. The government has bought out most of our tobacco people. But Roundup is being used on fields where they sometimes produce a human crop or an animal crop. And then, of course, Monsanto comes along and says, we can produce a plant who doesn't get poisoned by this stuff, but all the weeds get poisoned. Therefore, you don't have to plow your fields anymore. You just spray them and come along and reseed them, and you don't have to tear up the soil, etc., etc. Now we're all the way into a lawsuit. Had a man where I spoke last Sunday, did a seminar at the Franklin Church out other end of the state. And he came up and he says, I'm part of the lawsuit because I used Roundup on my place year in and year out, year in and out. I don't know what's going to happen there. I don't believe Roundup is good. I believe it's going to have a major physiological effect, and the cause, this class action suit, is Roundup and cancer. That's the big thing they're dealing with now. And you know how class action suits goes. They put them on television. If you've been harmed by this, etc., etc., etc. And then they qualify. The qualifications that I heard, because I like to talk to someone who's actually filed, he says it's exposure and years. How many gallons did you use over what period of time? And so I don't know where they're going to put the threshold. But as far as cancer, no, this man has got serious problems with cancer. So there's no doubt about the cancer side of it. Is it what was the cause? It's still a hard one. I mean, did it do it all? This man, being a vegetarian his whole life, has got a better case than someone who smoked and drank and, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe that helps a little bit. By the way, Blue Zones is a good book to read if you want to be inspired a little bit. What's that?
Blue Zone's Kitchen is a wonderful book.
Did you hear that? I'm not aware of that. She said Blue Zone's Kitchen is a wonderful book.
Also by National Geographic, Dan Buettner. They travel all over taking pictures, recipes of what these people, it's quite fascinating.
Awesome. Thank you for the tip. Go ahead, ma'am.
We want to know about herbs and garlic and salt and stuff like that. The use.
How many days do you
how much?
have?
I use a lot of herbs and seasonings.
I am an herbalist, mostly in the medicinal area for treating various conditions or helping to provide the supplements that people are missing in. That's most of my background. When it comes to culinary, you probably are going to be better talking to someone else. The biggest culinary one that I'd recommend would be put turmeric in everything. That's one of your best anti-inflammatories. Although you rarely get to a therapeutic level trying to put it in your menu. Societies who use a lot of turmeric seem to have a lot less Alzheimer's disease. So I think it does decrease the inflammation in your blood vessels. Most people primarily use it for joint inflammation. That's the biggest one. So I'm not the one to run your cooking school. I don't mind talking about protein, tell you what to do and what not to do, but making food taste good is my wife's business.
Deodorants, antiperspirants that have the aluminum zirconium in it.
Okay, a lot of debate on that. The most recent research I have on antiperspirants and aluminum, and we're worried about ladies using it on breast cancer, and they should be concerned about it because aluminum is a toxic metal. The difference the research showed was that intact skin and skin that had been shaved, if a lady shaves her arms pits and puts aluminum on, the amount of aluminum that's absorbed through the skin once you've broken that layer of tissue is much higher than if it didn't shave. Now, most of you men, I hope you're not shaving your armpits. No, I don't think that's a problem for you gentlemen. So therefore, it's still safe to avoid an aluminum-based one. But the difference between an antiperspirant and a deodorant means you're doing something to change a normal function of your body. Yeah, I don't want to have to put up with your BO, and I don't expect you to put up with mine. At the same time, I think I would rather you use something that changed the scent than the changing your biological function. So I'm not a real fan of using antiperspirants, or if you do, use very little. What can I say? I'm one of those people that are blessed because I don't stink, okay, or very little. Some people, you can work out in the same gym and you go, man, will you go take a shower? So we're not all the same, and some people have a greater need for it, and I don't know, maybe we all need to work outside more. But the point is, you want to avoid the aluminum, especially for the ladies, because they do absorb a lot more on when they shave their armpits and then use an aluminum antiperspirant. That is actually dangerous. I would highly recommend they avoid that. And by the way, if you study breast cancer, most ladies' breast cancer is in the upper outer quadrant. If you take the breast and divide it in 4, it's the upper outer quadrant that has the greatest amount of tumors. And that's right next to the axillary area. So it's not just hearsay or someone having a health nugget or something. I mean, I think it's got some validity. Yes, ma'am.
What is the effect of salt on diabetics?
The effect of salt? Once again, salt is an agency that is used mostly for curing. The way salt cures something is it bactericidal. It kills bacteria. Now, that's the upside of it. And that's why it was used back in the 1800s. You had your pickled this and salt brine this, and meat was cured by this because it killed bacteria. Bacteria cannot live once the salt concentration gets to a certain point. Now, physiologically, salt is very inflammatory to the blood vessel. That's why the kidneys keep the sodium level in your bloodstream in a very tight range. Your blood is salty. Your tears are salty. Your sweat is salty. So we know we have to have salt. But it keeps it in a very narrow range. When salt goes high in the body, we've got cystic fibrosis. And cystic fibrosis is a disease of your your ductwork in your body that have globulate cells, and that high sodium causes those cells to put off mucus, and that blocks up all kinds of unfortunate things, and cystic fibrosis people don't live that long. As far as sodium, in general, I believe you need some. I don't think you can be no sodium. But as far as for health, it should be somewhere between 500 milligrams and no more than 1,000 milligrams a day for sodium. Let's put that in kitchen terms. A half a teaspoon is 1,000 milligrams. A quarter of a teaspoon would be 500 milligrams. As far as high blood pressure, some people are salt sensitive, some people are not. You can take them off the salt and they don't get that much benefit. As far as diabetes, I'm not sure how much connection I can put between those two as far as sodium intake and being diabetic. But then look at the foods that are high sodium. Are they healthy? You're going to find your answer. No. By the time they put so much salt in, it's probably not worth eating. I've got this theory. If your food tastes bad, and you get out the salt shaker and have to salt it to make your food taste good, why don't you just admit up front, this is bad, and give it to the dog? Well, you may want to save your dog. The point is, the good food tastes good. You don't have to salt it to death. Now, you may have to go through a month or two transition. If you go off all salt, all added salt, all salt products for a month, and then go back and eat one bowl of soup that you ate after a month, you're going to go, whoa. So the taste buds do get numb. If you go back and resensitize them, then you're going to be much better off. Here's another rule. The more you cook your vegetables, the more salt you've got to put in. Am I not correct? The less you steam, the less you cook. Just want them just past so they're just slightly crunchy, you're going to have a lot better flavor. You ruin your flavor by cooking. And then you come back and dump a bunch of salt in. Look at any soup on your store thing and see how many milligrams of sodium are in one can of soup. Why does it need that much sodium? Because they've killed the flavor. Anyway, something to think about. Okay.
Yeah, earlier about the soy milk and the soybean. I think she was talking more about GMO products.
Okay, that is a very broad area, genetically modified organism, and I'm not sure why they call a plant an organism, but usually I confine that to the animal kingdom, but that's what they call these things. There's a variety of purposes. I had an opportunity, I was flying to the West Coast, I think, to lecture, and you never guess who I sat beside. I sat beside a man who was a soil scientist. Didn't tell him who I was. I didn't want him to know. I didn't want to bias his answers. He worked not for Monticello. He worked for the University, I think it was of Michigan, to try to figure out the genetic code of the corn for the company that was producing GMO corn. So he was like the government's answer to this over here. I'm going, this is going to be interesting. And so he went on to tell me the benefits of GMO. I said, okay. I didn't tell him who I was and what I thought. You learn better when you keep your mouth shut, right? So he was going through all these benefits of GMO. I go, that's impressive. You got a good point. That's a valid point. He goes, we can use this GMO over here, and we can decrease the amount of insecticides and pesticides I've got to pour on the land because this plant is going to resist this bug, and I don't need all this. I'm going, that's valid. Less toxic to my environment. And he went through a few good things. And so I'm going, wait a minute. Maybe I shouldn't put all GMO in one category and be locked in my mind that everything is always bad and no good. So, what's the real story of GMO? You're going to have to take each mutation and each GMO by itself and go through to see what's happening. Most people have a GMO category that's this big and everything fits in it. I'm going, you may need to reconsider. Now, about me, if I have a choice, I'll choose non-GMO because I don't know what they did to that corn or that soybean or that rice or whatever. But I also believe that there are some modifications that are not harmful. But what I'm going over, I don't want the harmful part. What I want to know is, are you increasing the nutrition in that plant? And that's where GMOs fall down. GMOs do not have more nutrition in that food. And if you're not getting any benefit, then any harm you're getting outweighs anything you could ever do. Here's the other thing. 85% of soybeans are GMO. 15% are not. I told you earlier that 85% are sold to animals and 15% are for humans. So it is possible that we can get all the non-GMO corn and soybeans we need and not even affect the market that much. So when you see non-GMO this or that, those farmers probably have always been non-GMO. It's just this is the new byword. So you're good there. But let's look at the other side of the coin. What if I'm feeding a GMO to the pig or to the cow or to the other animal that's going to be eaten? The average cow, the toxins, I know out in the pasture, that cow, what it consumes in the pasture, gets concentrated in the meat somewhere about 400 times. There's your problem. When you magnify any type of a problem by that much and eat it on a regular basis, I'm concerned about you. If I eat broccoli that's genetically modified, I get 1 dose. If I eat the cow over here, I get 400 doses, so to speak. So therefore, within reason, avoid your GMOs. But don't avoid them all because you go, this stuff is deadly. Well, no, I don't believe that. And I'm not ready to blame a lot of diseases on GMO. There's too many times when GMO doesn't even, well, you didn't see, I didn't lecture about GMO at all here. And these people, Bill wasn't worried about his GMOs, well, he may have been, I don't know the man, and decreasing his blood sugar level. So don't lose the big picture, and don't major on the minors, so to speak, too. But if you eat animal products, the GMOs become magnified so much that I would be much more concerned.
Over here, Phil.
I actually have 2 questions. The first one is I've talked to some vegetarians that say they have to take a B complex supplement because they're not getting enough through their vegetables.
Okay. You want to ask your second question?
The second one might be a little bit more complex.
That's okay.
With the population that I work with, I'm seeing a rise in mental health illnesses and autism. Is that something that can be reversed through diet?
Let's deal with the B12 because that's probably your issue. When you look at the population, there's more B12 deficiency in meat eaters than in vegetarians. So that's a fallacy they're talking about. Now, let's go back and face the facts. Do vegans have B12 deficiencies? Yes. It's just less vegans, percentage of vegans, than there are the meat eaters over here. I treat more B12 deficiencies in my meat-eating patients than I do in my vegetarian patients. So the first thing that comes to mind, I'm going, no, when a doctor that isn't a vegetarian and hasn't studied the field, and you walk in and you say, I'm a vegan or I'm a vegetarian, they click, you got a B12 problem. I'm going, you don't know that. In fact, if you're betting, you're even betting wrong. You don't even have your percentages down. So if you really truly want to know where you're at, you got to get your B12 checked. That just settles it. If your B12 level is fine, then whatever you're doing, whatever too much dirt or not enough dirt you're eating, or wherever you're getting your B12 from, no problem. Now, let's go back and talk about our whole day. The program that I'm recommending here requires a lot less B12 than the program you're on right now. Protein content of your diet is what determines how much B12 you need to eat. By reducing the protein in your diet, you don't need as much B12. Now, here's what we don't know. My wife and I were in a B12 study when we first went to Loma Linda. And when you first go to Loma Linda, you're the guinea pig, and then they have the bigger guinea pig, which is the person who's testing you. And so you always start at the lowest rung on any school system, okay? So my wife and I were in a B12 program. And I won't go into a lot of details because she's here. But the point is that we had to collect samples. Remember, I was married probably a month by now, and you try to explain this to your new bride about being in a B12 study. I'll let your imagination go. But the point is, we were eating no B12, as in supplements, and no known B12 in what we're eating. Although we probably ate some dry cereals. And if you, folks, you have to actually try to avoid B12 in your regular day-to-day eating if you start looking around. Your enriched flours, and if you eat a cracker, or if you eat your Wheaties, or if you eat, I mean, you have to almost try to avoid this stuff. But we weren't trying to avoid that unnecessarily. We were not eating any animal or animal-based products. So we were the subjects that would have been considered vegan. And guess what? She and I were in good shape. No B12 problem. And we were eating that way. So the fallacy is that all vegans have to have B12 supplements. That's the fallacy. Do some vegans have deficiencies? Yes. I propose to you, though, that that vegan that has a B12 deficiency would have a deficiency whether they ate Kentucky Fried Chicken every day, too. Because it's a bowel absorption problem that we're dealing with here, not quantity. Now I'm going to tell you a secret about broccoli. Where you grow your broccoli determines how much B12 is in it. Broccoli has a particular cell structure that doesn't need B12 to be healthy broccoli. But if you use organic fertilizers, and I'll leave it at that, mostly from the farm, if you use organic fertilizers on your field, the broccoli will pick up B12 and actually have B12 in the broccoli grown on manure because the soil is so rich, not because a plant has to have it. So we've got this debate and this struggle going back and forth, and no one has the answer how I can have good B12 levels and not eat any known B12 and not taking a supplement, etc., etc. We have all kinds of excuses. One excuse is you've got bacteria in your mouth that produce B12. And so you get up in the morning, you smile at yourself in the mirror, and you drink your water, and you swallow it. Where's the B12 going to go? Well, obviously, into your system. Or is it possible that your large intestine, which has all kinds of incredible bacteria that makes all kinds of B12, gets somehow regurgitated up into your small intestine, and there's not always a total situation where everything is always going downhill and out? That's another possible explanation. Because see, your B12 absorption is your distal ileum. The smallest, lowest, bottom part of your small intestine is where you absorb your B12. So when I've got a cancer patient or I've got a surgical patient that loses that part of their intestine, those are the ones I check on. So that's about B12. The other part, the lady is dealing with mental health issues and diet. I happen to believe that the best way to handle mental health issues is diet. Because all the chemicals we have to help these people, you pay such a high price for. The biggest one, and some of you in this room will attest to, the biggest thing is we give people antidepressants. And antidepressants don't help depression. we don't have a drug that is a true antidepressant. What we have is a drug that numbs up the mind so you don't give a rip whether you're depressed or not. And if you don't believe me, and you've got a good friend who's taken these and they're willing to be honest, say, ma'am, sir, are you less depressed? And they'll look you right in the eye and they will tell you, no, but I don't cry every morning now. I'm saying, well, I'm thankful. I'm not trying to put people down. People try to do the best they can, I believe, most of the time. But what the point I'm trying to make is an antidepressant is a serotonin uptake inhibitor type of drug that changes how you think. In the olden days, we called it a frontal lobotomy. You cut or you chemically alter brain function and you don't give a rip what happens in the classroom if you're a teacher. If the kids are throwing the desk around the room, you sit there calmly and fill out your report cards. So we have found a way to give them chemical frontal lobotomies. And to me, that's just a shame. Because most depression has to do with a nutrient imbalance. Ask another question. They tell you, we give antidepressants because you've got a chemical imbalance. Well, that sounds good on paper. Did you ask them what chemical that might be, if they would test it? No, show me. You tell me I have a chemical imbalance, please tell me the chemical, and let's do a lab test and see if I'm out of balance. They're going to laugh at you and probably tell you to leave the office because they don't do that, and they don't have that. And they can't tell you what chemical because it's an excuse, folks, to make you feel not so bad about being doped up. I am frustrated because I happen to believe that antidepressants are not just about keeping you from being depressed. I actually believe, and I think I can prove this, that it changes how you think. And when it changes how you think, I'm very, very cautious. Because you depend, and I depend, on the same Holy Spirit to know what to think and how to think and when to think and making decisions, and I fear that that is going to be a big inhibitor. As far as autism, as far as other mental health things, even if you're not as successful, you'd like to give your child or the adult, depending on who it is, you'd like to give them a pill and have everything be perfect. We all want that for our loved ones. It doesn't happen. You'd like that autistic child to have normal brain function and everything be good and all that. You are still better off at treating that child nutritionally, with proper sleep, with proper love. Don't try to stick them in school with 18 other people. You keep them on the farm. You know their capacities. You know how good they do. You work them to death, so to speak. You love them real good. You feed them well, and you find out what their capacities are. And they may be brilliant in some area, but they can't do it in proper society because they may not have the brain be set up that way. I'm not for all these kids trying to go to school and trying to mainstream all this. It's total nonsense. People are not the same. People aren't expected to be the same. But I think every person needs to have a chance. And I don't think we're doing that right now. I don't know if that answered your question, but hopefully nailed some things down. Yes, ma'am.
My question is about, well, I have two. Seizures.
You have two what?
Seizures. How
Okay.
do you, and two questions, actually. The second one is about seizures. What do you feel about it? Like, I don't know how to explain it.
Okay. Let me give some broad definitions and maybe this will help, okay? Number one, seizure activity is something that is pretty much central. In other words, it's happening in the brain. It's not happening out in it's central nervous system versus peripheral and all this. Okay. So I'm dealing with something going on in the brain, and the reason we call it a seizure is because we consider it abnormal. So it could be abnormal all the way to the point where you have a grand mal seizure and lay on the ground and we're worried about you biting your tongue or airway problems and all that. You know, so you can have grand mal and petit mal. And now I'm seeing the whole area of seizures being broadened out to even twitches and stuff that I wouldn't call a seizure in the past. I am not a neurological expert, but I am not ready to put all these kids or adults on the drugs to suppress whatever mental activity that they deem a slight bit wrong. So I don't know where you're at on this scale that I'm talking about. But what I don't want is to limit your ability either to work or to drive or to have a family or whatever you're working with unless it's absolutely necessary for your own protection and if you're in charge of someone else. So that's kind of where I draw the line. Now, we have some people who have seizures from NutraSweet. So first of all, we clean up your diet. We clean up your lifestyle. We don't leave any rock unturned. We take you off caffeine. Of course, we don't want you to smoke. We take you off artificial sweeteners. We even take you off food colorings. We do everything that may be a potential chemical reason why the brain's this way. And then if you tell me you were riding your Harley Davidson 2 years ago and you're in a severe accident, you're glad to be alive, I'm going to go, well, this could be due to scar tissue. In other words, other reasons affect. Now, there's only one time I will tell you to consider a ketogenic diet. And that is, if it's the only way that I can help you deal with your seizures, I consider it better for you to be on a high-fat diet which has a suppressing effect on brain seizure activity versus being on the drugs. But I really reserve that, and I usually reserve it for children that are basically just having seizures. But we know children have seizures when their fevers get to 105 and 106. They come back down and they're just fine. So we know that the brain has abnormal activity depending on temperature too.
My son, he has seizure activity, and
Be more specific.
it's like when he has a seizure,
Yes.
when he had a grand mal seizure,
Okay.
his temperature would be really, really high too.
Even though he wasn't running a fever, wasn't having an infection, wasn't dealing with a virus or
Right.
bacteria or Lyme's disease or anything.
Not that I know of.
No, your point's well taken. I have been observing temperatures in people that aren't having an infection. I've been observing temperatures in people who have autoimmune diseases now. And therefore, I conclude that a person can have a temperature because of an immune reaction, not of infection. That's one thing. The next thing is the brain uses temperature to try to control things. A fever is the body's attempt to get rid of a virus. The virus doesn't give you a fever. Your body gives you a fever to try to combat the virus. With his temperature being up, I'd be looking for autoimmune type processes that may be affecting his seizure activity.
Wow. Also, I'm a CNA, and we had like a test on Alzheimer's, and they were saying that some of the Alzheimer's have aluminum in their brains.
Correct.
And also, some of them said that it could be mad cow disease.
Well, to differentiate all that out, first of all, when you deal with Alzheimer's disease and they do the biopsies on the brain, when they actually confirm it. Now, remember, Alzheimer's is the new dementia, so to speak. Well, it's not new anymore. But we tend to use that word relatively loosely, okay? And the only way you can confirm it is do a biopsy, and we don't want those ahead of time, not on the brain anyway. So, at this point, we would have to confirm that with an autopsy. But what you will find, if it truly is Alzheimer's, you will find aluminum in the nerve tissue. But here's the question we don't know. Chicken or egg? Does aluminum cause the disease? Or does the disease process absorb and store the aluminum? So what happened 15, 20 years ago? Everybody got rid of their wherever aluminum pots that my dad used to sell when I was a kid, and they went to stainless steel. That's not a bad move anyway. I don't think we need more aluminum. That's one issue. The other issue is that to differentiate between mad cow disease and Alzheimer's, it requires the brain to be evaluated too. Now, there are many people, I got friends and the doctors do talk, and we don't, I mean, there's things they don't say to other people, but the point is, had a friend who's a pathologist, and I'm free to talk because he's no longer here, so I can't get him or me in trouble. He worked for the VA. He was the one that did the brain evaluations on patients. And of course, he had to have permission, but on the Alzheimer's ward in this VA hospital, when the relatives, the wife, children, whatever, would allow him to do the brain evaluation on their deceased loved one, his rate at that time, I think I got my number correct, it's been a while since I thought this, it was over 20% of the people on the Alzheimer's ward that were diagnosed with Alzheimer's actually had mad cow. Diagnosed by looking at the brain, not a psychiatric or a psychological test, actually looking at tissue. And so I asked the reasonable question, how do you get rid of it? How do you kill mad cow disease? Carbonic acid, or if you're at home, probably just good old Clorox. So if you're worried about basically the prions, which are not an organism, they're much smaller than a virus because they're usually a chain of like 6 proteins. They make your cells duplicate this so they don't even have their own duplicating ability. It's an incredible infection that people have. And we still think it's spread animal to human. If you read, what was that book? Something Feast, Deadly Feast. Boy, that's been a long time. Deadly Feast is a book that talks about a disease called Kuru. And it talks about the cannibals living in some of the South Sea Islands. And, of course, they have a different attitude than you or I. When I die, I will my children my finances, not my brain, or my left leg. And in their culture, they would give their body parts out to their friends so they would, they're cannibals. So, I mean, hey, if you're going to eat something, I'd like you to have my right leg. I mean, we just don't think of it that way. And this is the research that was done over the years, and they saw what happened with the prion diseases. It's an amazing book. And it's so amazing that the part that gets my attention is they want to find out how does this disease go to the brain? And this was hard for me to believe, but I'm going to share it with you anyway because he's got the results. They gave patients a very, very fine powdered gold dust to breathe through their nostrils. They found some of that dust actually in brain tissue. So toward the end of the book they say, please do not use bone meal that you normally would to take care of your roses. If you're the kind of person who's a gardener and likes to have these gorgeous, beautiful roses, this book was recommending do not use bone meal because of why? You don't know who ground up what and where it came from, etc., etc. So when you deal with prion-based diseases, mad cow disease, or you deal with Alzheimer's, you almost have to go through the autopsy to be that definitive. And it is a real disease, and it does affect humans. And I don't know what percentage would come out, because most of the time we do not do that testing to know for sure. So,
Diane, Phil would just keep doing this till tomorrow, right? No.
I've got more on the computer.
Well,
no.
We've been going at it for a couple of hours, and people are beginning to leave on me. And so I thought we would see if we really wanted to continue. We could ask questions all night long, and Phil would be gracious enough to stay. But at the same time, he can give you your business card.
I do.
And he'll be glad to talk with you. I'll invite him back. And now John said invite him back every year for the next 10 years. Evidently, he doesn't realize how old you and I are.
Really?
For the next 10 years, that's probably not going to happen.
Do you supply wheelchairs?
Don't you want me to invite him back, though? Yeah. And Phil has several topics, of course, that he can emphasize. But why don't we stop for tonight, since we've been going at it for a couple of hours, and several of our, like I said, we've got people driving away, and so that means we've been here a little bit too long. So let's stand. We'll have a word of prayer, and if you want to talk to Phil a little bit, he might let you talk a little longer. But Diane's going to make him go home here pretty soon. So let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you again for this Sabbath. We're so glad that Dr. Collins has been here and that we have been able to not only hear his take, his guidance, about diabetes, but on a host of other issues also. So, Father, we pray that much of this that we have heard, that we will take it into our lives, take it into our diet, take it into the way we eat, when we eat, all of these aspects, Father, so that we may be that wonderful temple that you can dwell in. Thank you again for the blessing of this Sabbath. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much.